Hello and welcome to Pathfinder Drum Corps lesson number 5 on 30-second notes and drum rolls. Now that you know basic technique and how to read basic music, time to move to the section that most people want to jump to right away. 30-second notes and, of course, drum rolls. I cannot stress enough that trying to shortcut the basics so that you can do a drum roll as soon as possible most often results in having to unlearn the bad habits as a direct result of those shortcuts. I never teach rolls to anyone until they have a clear grasp of basic technique, because rolls are nothing more than an extension of that technique. So, promise me that you're not going to try to learn these drum rolls until you've mastered basic technique. Remember, do my honest part. Okay, so now on to 30-second notes. Visually, a 30-second note and a 30-second rest are written like this, with 3 beams. Counting is only done on the 16th notes. Unless you're an auctioneer, you won't have time to add any more words to the counting past 16th notes, especially if you play music that is faster than 120 beats per minute. The technique to playing 30-second notes is rather simple, and once you learn it, you can apply it to 16th notes or any other of the slower movements to make them easier. The trick is to use different muscles and muscle groups to play your drum strokes. If I try to play 16th notes with basic 16th note techniques at twice the speed, it'll make for rather challenging 30-second notes. However, it is possible, and we may discuss that in a later video. So here's what we do. You move your hands just like in 16th notes, but instead of hitting the drum head once, you hit it twice. Watch me as I alternate between 16th and 30-second notes, noticing that my wrists and forearms move in roughly the same fashion. So what is the additional technique that adds the extra hit without much additional effort? Let me slow it down and show it to you. Remember that you only need to move the drumstick downward because it will bounce back on its own. Here's a reminder of what happens when you strike the drum head but stop your hand when you make contact. To play 30-second notes, we take advantage of that rapid bounce back, known as a free stroke, and immediately do an additional stroke but with different muscles. The 16th notes are played with the wrist technique, like this. Since you are using a wrist technique to make the hit, you can follow it up with a finger technique as a quick snap and get a second hit. Slowed way down, it looks like this. Alternating between wrist motion and a finger motion is much easier than trying to play 2 rapid wrist movements. As previously mentioned, you can use this tactic on slower techniques to make it even easier, such as 8th notes with the same hand. 8th notes with wrist only look like this. Now I alternate with the wrist on the beat and the fingers on the and counts. See how much easier that is? Drumming at slower speeds sounds much more musical if each hit has a little difference in the tone and volume. Otherwise, it sounds too mechanical like a drum machine. So quite often the beats are played just a little bit louder than the other notes. Using wrist and fingers for 8th notes accomplishes that almost naturally. So let's work on wrist and finger techniques for 30-second notes. We start by doing it very slowly. This may seem too slow, but we need to get the technique right. Make sure you get both hits to sound the same. A common mistake is not leaving the hand down far enough so that when you snap your fingers, the stick is either above the drum head or it barely makes contact. You need to have the stick make strong contact on both hits, so practice keeping the wrist angled downward, until after snapping your fingers. Remember to grip the stick between your middle finger and your thumb. Lots of people want to use their index finger, but that has significant limitations to the free stroke. Work on both hands individually. Then when each hand seems to have it down fairly well, try alternating hands like you will when playing 30-second notes. As always, do not favor one hand over the other. If anything, do more with your weaker hand so that they will become equal. Once you can do proper technique of 30-second notes, try to speed it up. The best way I found with this is by playing to metronome. I downloaded a free metronome app for my phone and I use it for both drum corps and for march and drill. Find a speed where you can play comfortably, then try matching that speed exactly for 1 minute. You may notice in the beginning of the minute it's pretty easy, but as time goes on, you may start straying just a little bit from that speed, either faster or slower. Practicing to a metronome is perhaps one of the best things you can do to learn not only good technique, but also good self-discipline. Then slowly speed up the metronome. Not by much, just by increments of say 4 beats per minute. Remember, we march at 120 steps per minute, so we play at 120 beats per minute. So what you want to be able to do is actually get to where you can play comfortably faster than 120, so when you play at 120 it's actually pretty easy. I personally like to master something at about 132 to 140 beats per minute. Then when I slow it down to 120, it's a piece of cake. Now, while working on consistency and timing, you can mix it up by alternating 16th and 32nd notes. Try a measure of each, or a half measure of each. Do not get frustrated if this takes a while to learn. I'm much more worried about the person who says they got it down in a few hours than the person that is taking weeks as it normally takes while trying to get the movements to feel natural and automatic. Remember to keep your body and your muscles relaxed. You should not be tensing your arms to play faster. So, let's review 30-second notes. First, it involves one downward stroke like a 16th note, but has 2 distinct hits, one with the wrist and the other with the fingers. Second, the 2 hits from the same hand should sound the same. They can sound a little different when using this technique for 8th notes, but 30-second notes should always be the same. Third, the body should be relaxed. If you are tensing any muscles, then you are doing it wrong. Now that we've gone over 30-second notes with matched grip, let's try it with traditional grip. The concept is the same. A full wrist movement for the first hit, and then a snap of the thumb to create the second hit. One advantage to the traditional grip is that it is much easier to get the second hit. In the matched grip position, you have to keep your wrist down to get the finger snap to hit the drumhead. With traditional grip, you can see that my wrist actually moves back a bit before making the thumb movement. This wrist and finger technique for match or traditional grip is vital for anyone that plays a snare drum. It's also useful for anyone on the multi-toms or even on the bass drum. Now, while you may not be doing as many 30-second notes or rolls on the bass drum, the wrist and finger variations can help you to save energy, which keeps you from getting tired while playing. And while I have not yet seen any cymbal parts that involve 30-second notes, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But the concept is still something to think about, using different approaches to play so that you can save energy while maintaining the same sound. Now, let's practice reading 30-second notes. Again, here is what a measure of 30-second notes looks like. Okay, that's pretty simple. Even if you are still working on the 30-second note technique, you can tell that this is just 30-second notes. But what about this? How about this one? Now try this one. And here's another one. And one last pattern, one that I've actually used in drum corps music that I wrote. Now for drum rolls. Since you have the technique for 30-second notes, drum rolls should be easy, and here's why. In case you haven't figured it out already, the 30-second notes that I just taught are drum rolls. While there are different types of drum rolls, the most common is what I just taught, and it's called the double stroke roll. In later lessons, we may go over the other ones, such as the single stroke roll, the triple stroke roll, and the multiple bounce roll. Now do you see why I stress the importance of good technique in your 30-second notes? Too many students just try to bury the drumstick into the drum head in order to get a drum roll. But the double stroke roll sounds so much better, and it can be slowed down and sped up in order to sound clean and consistent. It also allows multiple drummers to do this together. Hey, just like a drum corps. Practice this on your own and come back and watch the video as often as you need to. As always, in-person drum lessons are the preferred way to go, as a real drum teacher can catch on to things and imperfections in your technique that you may not be noticing. Keep working on your 30-second notes until they become automatic and they sound the same with both the left and right hand. In the meantime, I'll start working on the next video. Catch you next time.